Welcome to The Outlet, an NBA podcast hosted by Nick, Fay and Kory Waldron.
On this episode, Kory and I discuss NBA trades we'd like to see done this offseason. As always, you can catch The Outlet on all streaming platforms. Enjoy the show. All right, Kory. Trade rumors have been cooking. Free agent rumors have been cooking. Obviously the offseason is going to be an express version. And today we're going to talk about some trades we want to see get done. Not necessarily trades that we love or we do as a GM, but kind of trades that just make sense for the NBA and kind of make things a little bit more exciting. So kick things off for us. Which trade do you want to start with?
Let's start off with a brain buster one, and this is your James Harden base deal to the Brooklyn Nets. Now, of course, James Harden likely isn't going to be going anywhere, but again, The Athletic put out a story yesterday that painted James Harden in a very negative picture on top of a lot of other chaos going on with the Houston Rockets, which makes it possible that James Harden could want out, and the Brooklyn Nets are one of the few teams on the list of teams that he'd be interested in.
Kendrick Perkins said it was Philadelphia or Brooklyn. And I know Kendrick Perkins, not necessarily the most credible reporter, but a guy who knows the players. And he was actually one of the first people that said that Kevin Durant was going to go to Brooklyn, and he locked it in about 2 weeks before it happened. So a little bit of credibility there. Not saying it's going to happen. Like you said, I think a James Harden trade is pretty unlikely for this offseason, but just for fun, we're going to run through this one. So I got PJ Tucker and James Harden going to the Nets. I got Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, Taurean Prince, Jared Allen, and 3 first-round picks and 3 second-round picks going to Houston. Thoughts on this deal, and do you think it's plausible, or do you think that the Nets need to add more?
I think it's plausible because the Nets are giving up their 3 best assets and a ton of draft picks. And again, the Rockets need draft picks at this point in time. It's the one thing they're seriously lacking. And if you're going to be giving up James Harden, who is a top 5 player in the NBA, getting back Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, and Jared Allen is a really good starting point because all 3 of those players can contribute to winning some sort of basketball now, and you're still getting a bunch of draft picks for the future. So I think for the Nets standpoint, for the Rockets standpoint, you're getting as much talent back as you can probably get for getting James Harden. And then if you're the Nets, you now have a big 3. It's Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden. Does it fit perfectly? Maybe not, because all 3 of those guys are offensively based players. So that might be a question mark. But again, we've talked about this on the last show we did. You don't turn down star power. You don't turn down superstars if you can get them. And not to mention, you're also adding a guy like PJ Tucker who can play some of that small ball 5. Right, just play some of that small ball 5. I know that's a guy you and Jack both wouldn't mind seeing on the Brooklyn Nets anyways as a role player. So, again, I like this fit for the Nets in terms of getting star power. And for the Rockets, you're probably not going to get a better deal for James Harden unless there's some other super package out there that I'm not thinking about at the moment.
Yeah, maybe Denver can get in there if they want to put Bol, Michael Porter Jr. and stuff, but still, I think you're getting a little bit more quantity of talent. You're not necessarily getting a superstar in this deal. Like, I don't think Karis LeVert's going to turn into a superstar. Spencer Dinwiddie, not going to happen. Jared Allen, not going to happen. Maybe these guys can turn into all-stars. I think that's really plausible for Karis LeVert, potentially for Jared Allen. Spencer Dinwiddie's already kind of been on the fringe of that, and it would probably put the Rockets in a position where they're not terrible, because they don't even have their own first-round pick. So, tanking is not really an option for them. So it's a situation where, hey, we're getting off James Harden. We're kind of retooling/rebuilding because now we have all the Nets picks. They're not probably going to be good picks. They're probably going to be in the 20s. Nothing where we're going to get, ton of amazing players. But at least we have a new direction for the franchise. And there is potential to make the playoffs. Would these players on the roster, Robert Covington if they don't move him, or Russell Westbrook in the scenario, you could talk yourself into the Rockets maybe making the 8th seed. I'm not saying I would lock them in or anything like that, but it would be in consideration. They obviously are losing PJ Tucker. And the way I convinced myself that the Rockets would accept PJ Tucker being traded in this deal would be it saves them $3.7 million, which we know Rockets ownership is looking to do right now.
Yeah, and in this deal, or in this hypothetical, if the Rockets don't trade Russell Westbrook, you're running out a lineup of Russell Westbrook, Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, Robert Covington, and Jared Allen, which really isn't that bad of a starting 5. Again, it's not going to win you any major playoff series, but it could probably get you into playoffs, at least keeps you competitive having that kind of a starting 5. And then maybe you can flip Westbrook down the line if it becomes easier, or so on and so forth. But this would be definitely a good starting move for the Rockets because, again, it feels like if not Russell Westbrook and Harden could be traded still. I'm not completely sold on Harden staying in Houston after that article last night.
Yeah, and I would also say like they could flip Karis LeVert, they could flip Spencer Dinwiddie, they could flip Jared Allen if they wanted to, if they didn't like these guys enough, and maybe get another first round pick in the deal and go complete rebuild. And like you said, just I mean, listening to a lot of podcasts today from The Ringer to The Athletic, there's just not a lot of confidence in Houston. Obviously, D'Antoni's gone, Morey's gone, and now you have this, rumor and maybe feud, or what was it too? James Harden wasn't even answering his phone for the front office or
Yeah,
ownership.
he's been ghosting. He's been pulling a Buddy Hield with Luke Walton, but to the whole organization.
And he's a superstar level player where Buddy Hield isn't that level of player. So It's upsetting. But when this guy's kind of the keys to the franchise, he's everything in Houston in terms of basketball. Now it's like, okay, what do we do in this situation? And just from the net side, like you said, Kory, just to touch on it quickly, you have an opportunity to add 3 of the best offensive players in the NBA, possibly 2 top 10 guys, 3 top 15 guys. This has the potential for a dynasty and multiple championships. It could not work out too. Like it could be terrible, but it also could be amazing and be one of the best teams we've seen in this generation. Obviously, we just saw the Warriors, but this would be a team that maybe could get up to that level considering how good Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving are. So
it really does. It raises the ceiling. And again, depending, and if say God forbid Kevin Durant isn't 100% of himself, well, having a guy like James Harden and Kyrie Irving takes a lot of pressure off Kevin Durant for having to be that guy if he isn't that same guy. But again, we've heard a lot of rumors, of him torching people and pickup games and everything else. So that shouldn't be a concern, but another thought to have.
Yeah, or even just the fact of like not as much pressure throughout the season for all 3 guys because, you look at James Harden, his major struggle is this dude is really grinding all year long, comes to the playoffs, he's gassed out. Like you even see his numbers from game 1 to game 4, he's a very good player. Game 5 to game 7, he's pretty bad. You wouldn't think he was the level of player which he is. So, but moving on to there, let's hit one of your trades, Kory. Let's go with the Hornets and the Rockets. We got Russell Westbrook going to the Hornets, and we got a 2022 first-round pick going to the Hornets, and the Rockets are receiving Nicholas Batum and Terry Rozier.
So again, this is a really simple trade. Obviously, the Hornets are one of the teams that are being linked to Russell Westbrook by having interest. Westbrook has a Jordan brand partnership, so it also kind of makes sense. Jordan and Westbrook also kind of have the same type of mindset and tenacity. If we're going to come right at you.
So he had a quote when he won MVP that this would be the type of player that I would be or I was or something like that. So the connection is there.
Right. So, and the connection is what makes a lot of sense. The Hornets also have these fire new Buzz City City Edition jerseys coming out. So to help sell some of those, Westbrook would definitely help that. So, of course, the Hornets get a star player in Russell Westbrook. They get a draft pick, and then the Rockets are getting cap relief, more or less. They're getting huge cap relief because Batum's expiring. You're off of that Westbrook money, and you're getting Terry Rozier, who had a really good year, still being overpaid at $18 million, but had a really good year for the Hornets and can play still some of that point guard position for the Rockets. So it's Rockets thinking of freeing up cap space, Hornets trying to win now.
Yeah, I like it. I think the Rockets maybe would have to change their first-round pick because I want to say that they can't trade consecutive first-round picks. And if I was Houston, I would probably try to be like, hey, could I do this with 2 second-round picks instead of a first? But, they might be looking to take on that contract because, like you said, the cap relief is there. Like, that's a major cap relief because even Rozier's contract is 2 years. So you're looking at, 2022, 23, like, hey, we're going to have some money to play with. Maybe not to the craziest extent, but you could get Harden, another tool, or even trying to trade Rozier's contract isn't crazy, or even trading Batum because he is expiring. Like, you could convince me that maybe it gets to the deadline, the Rockets are trying to make a splash move, and they trade Batum to the Cavs for Kevin Love, and they give the Cavs, some cap relief in that situation. So I don't hate it. If I'm Houston, I probably am praying that maybe I can get a better deal out there that maybe could give me some players that could help me convince James Harden to stay now. But from a pure cap relief perspective, like if I was the GM of the Rockets, this is a deal I would definitely consider. I would try to do it without the first round pick because I think, it's not like they're giving you back good players. But Rozier is solid. Like you said, he's probably $5 million overpaid, but I still think he was a pretty good player for them last year. So I wouldn't rule this out. And the Hornets have been one of the teams that actually are interested in Westbrook, which is like 3 teams.
I also heard today they're one of the teams that have called the Pacers numerous times to see if Miles Turner has any availability. So it looks like the Hornets are being somewhat, at least active in trying to see if any of these disgruntled stars may want out so they can try and throw some package together. Because again, they don't have a great abundance of young talent, but they do have some nice young pieces. PJ Washington, Miles Bridges, Malik Monk. If people still have some hope for him, so they do have some young assets. Devontae Graham, and then again, Rozier's a pretty tradable contract at this point because his value isn't that low.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at it too. If they were able to land a guy like Miles Turner along with Russell Westbrook, you could convince me that, hey, they're probably a playoff team. Like Miles Turner's the type of center that you want with Westbrook because he's staying away from the rim. And like you said, they have these other pieces on the roster where, hey, maybe we can make some other deals, get some upgrades. We have a little bit of cap space too. Obviously, I think they'd be losing some in this deal, but something to consider. But all right, what do we hit next?
I mean, we should move on to we keep the Rockets train going, right? We have another Rockets and this time Pistons trade brought to you by you.
Yes. Clean swap here. We got Russell Westbrook for Blake Griffin. Now, obviously, the Pistons are taking on that extra year of Russell Westbrook's contract. I think you have a little bit more confidence in Russell Westbrook actually being on the court the next 3 seasons. Not saying he's going to maintain the level in which he's playing at. There's more concern with, to be honest, Blake not even playing 40 games over the next 2 years. Like that's a real concern. But from the Rocket side, you look at this deal because, hey, Blake is actually probably a better fit next to James Harden than Russell Westbrook is because he doesn't necessarily need the ball in his hands. He can spread the floor a little bit. And maybe he doesn't have to have that giant workload he was having in Detroit so he can ease those knees a bit. So I think this is a trade that neither team probably loves, but it's something on the table that, hey, this kind of makes sense for both of us.
Yeah, I mean, the Pistons standpoint is you're getting a marquee player who hopefully stays on the court to help sell tickets.
Which they've been trying to do desperately since they opened their new arena.
100%. And I think the big issue why they've obviously had some struggles is because Blake Griffin has been unable to stay healthy over the duration of the past couple years. So you get Westbrook in there. I like that from the Pistons standpoint. You have Westbrook. Maybe you can sell some seats. Maybe you can flip him down the road. And then, like you said, from the Rockets' perspective, Blake Griffin, if he's healthy, might be a decent complementary player to James Harden. He's kind of become a point forward in this latter half of his career, a good facilitator. I'm not sure you'd want him to play small ball 5, and I'm sure they're going to want to go back to a traditional center in Houston. But Blake Griffin could probably play some small ball 5 if the league keeps playing the way it's playing. He does have a slight 3-point shot to his game that he's developed, and apparently is on the best 2 knees he's had in years.
Just doesn't say much.
Right, doesn't say much, but I do like this trade from a clean swap perspective.
And I would say maybe Houston has to put in some picks to, entice Detroit to take on that extra year of the contract. Maybe it's a 2nd-round pick. Maybe at worst it's a 1st-round pick, but it's something to consider. And just to take a quick look at Blake Griffin's 3-point shooting, this last season where he only played 18 games, we're going to ignore that year. But in 2018, 36% from 3 on 7 attempts. And in 17-18 with Detroit, he had over 5 attempts at 34%. So a pretty good 3-point shooter for a big. Like that's the numbers that you like. And like you said, the passing is there. Could definitely be an intriguing little 2-man combo between him and Harden.
For sure.
So, but moving on to another trade that you got for us. Let's see what we're going with. We have a crazy one with the Spurs, Warriors, and Magic. So we got the Spurs getting Aminu, Aaron Gordon, Andrew Wiggins. And then we have the Warriors getting LaMarcus Aldridge and Rudy Gay. And then we have the Magic getting DeMar DeRozan, the Warriors' 2nd-round pick via Dallas, and the Spurs' 2nd-round pick of their own. Lay it out for me.
Yeah, so we've heard the rumblings that are getting aggressive behind the scenes, that the Spurs are being active on the phone calls, and we've also heard the LaMarcus Aldridge to the Warriors rumors. And we've also heard the DeMar DeRozan rumors. So this was me just trying to piece up some sort of trade in which DeMar DeRozan gets out, the Warriors get LaMarcus Aldridge, and the Spurs somehow get young assets because, as we talked about in the last pod we did, the Spurs don't have young assets that you can say maybe we can build around these guys in the future. They just don't have those guys. DeJounte Murray is probably the closest thing to that. So this trade, the Spurs under Greg Popovich say, something, we'll take the risk and we'll gamble on Aaron Gordon and Andrew Wiggins. Maybe these guys don't develop into superstars or into all-stars, but we're going to take that risk because our window is now. We can get 2 young players in. Craig Popovich can start to mold them. Gordon, defensive-minded. DeJounte Murray, obviously defensive-minded. So you started to have some defensive-minded guys. You're getting out some of the old veterans in Aldridge and DeMar and Rudy Gay. So the Spurs are just taking the youth chance. They're going to bring on Wiggins, bring on Gordon, and see if those guys can become anything. The Warriors are still in win-now mode. Rudy Gay can play the 6-man off the bench role. LaMarcus Aldridge, a very good big. Still has a really good mid-range shot, post-game shot. So you're bringing in LaMarcus Aldridge, take some of that pressure off Draymond Green as well. well. And then the Magic, you're getting that offensive punch that they've been looking for, right? This is a guy who can create his own offense, create his own shot, an underrated playmaker, a decent rebounder, not a great defender, but again, the Orlando Magic have a really good defensive system, so hopefully DeMar DeRozan can kind of just, play in. And then, of course, Magic are getting a couple draft picks because they are losing Aaron Gordon, and they are bringing on DeMar DeRozan, who's expiring. So that was my thought process.
Yeah, I mean, definitely intriguing. And I've been trying to think about what the Spurs are going to do for like the last 24 hours. It could be something like this. The only thing I would say, if I'm San Antonio, I would request getting a pick back for taking on Wiggins' contract. Even if I have confidence in him turning into a solid player, like no matter who Wiggins is, like I don't think he's ever going to be a $30 million type of guy. Right. So if I'm San Antonio, I'm saying, hey, Golden State, you guys need to send me a first-round pick. It doesn't have to be the number 2 pick in the draft. You can just send me your own 2021 pick if you still have it for next year. And if they don't have it, then send me a 22 or 23. Doesn't have to be anything crazy, but I do want to probably get a pick if I'm the Spurs taking on that type of contract. And I think Aldridge has been rumored to the Warriors a little bit. Rudy Gay makes a ton of sense because he kind of fits the mold of basketball they play. And like Orlando, you could convince me Orlando would make this trade just because they believe in DeMar DeRozan, and it just feels like they have 0% belief in Aaron Gordon, and DeRozan kind of helped push them to that next level. Obviously, there's some question with the fit between him and Markelle Fultz in terms of lack of three-point shooting, but definitely an interesting layout that would make a splash move.
Yeah.
But moving on, let's see what we got next. We are going to talk about Jrue Holiday, obviously a guy who's been in trade rumors for, it seems like, since Anthony Davis was traded. So we have the Pelicans taking on Gary Harris, PJ Dozier, and Bol Bol, and receiving a 2021 first-round pick, top 10 protected, and the Nuggets are receiving Jrue Holiday.
Walk me through it, Nick. Why are the Pelicans making this move, and why are the Nuggets going, all in?
I mean, the Nuggets, it makes a ton of sense. There's an easy one here. Jrue Holiday is a guy that they definitely could have used in the postseason. If he's on that squad last year, you convinced me maybe they have a chance at beating the Lakers because it gives them that third scoring option, gives them that upgraded defense, just somebody who's going to not only help with on-ball defense, but also with off-ball defense. And the Pelican side, you're just trying to get value for Jrue Holiday. He's kind of been overhyped, a little overvalued, and we talked about it in the last show. It felt like, New Orleans was putting out rumors to try to up his value with the whole Atlanta Hawks and the number 6 pick. So I feel like this is more of the realm of trades that they'll actually receive. Gary Harris, solid 3-and-D guy that hasn't been hitting the threes, dealt with a lot of injuries. Maybe he can turn things around in New Orleans. Worst case, he doesn't. You get rid of him. PJ Dozier, a guy that we saw in the postseason, had a couple good minutes. Not necessarily like a key part of the trade, but a little like flyer on a guy that maybe could be good. And I think you look at this from New Orleans, you're like, Bol. This is a guy, we can keep him healthy. He'd be a great piece for us down the line and a great fit next to Zion. There's no guarantee, but it's one of those things where, hey, I'll take this lotto ticket and see what happens. And then you can never go wrong with first-round picks. You never can have enough, especially in the 2021 draft, which is supposed to be stacked. And we already know New Orleans is stacking up those picks, so they could probably trade up if they wanted to add another young piece of that roster.
I mean, I like this deal. For the Pelicans' perspective, you're just getting young talent in place of Jrue Holiday. You're doing right by Jrue Holiday, right? Drew's going to be playing meaningful basketball, or at least competing for arguably a title, because I think that Nuggets team with Jrue Holiday and Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, and in this situation, you're keeping Michael Porter Jr., you'd have to say that's a title contender out in the West.
Yeah, I mean, Western Conference Finals last year. Can't 100%. Sleep on them anymore.
Exactly. And you got to think, like you said, the Gary Harris point of Gary Harris, when he was being an effective offensive player in the playoffs last year, the Nuggets were really good, but you couldn't get enough of that. He, like you mentioned, he's been banged up the last couple of years. Pelicans take a flyer on Gary Harris. It also kind of makes sense for the Pelicans because depending on what J.J. Redick does in the future, Gary Harris can just fill up that role of J.J. Redick and provide three, maybe not to the same level, but provides better defense. And Bol, we saw him in a very small sample size in the Orlando bubble, but there is something there. Can it be, can he progress enough to become a rotational player? That's the question. Still too many turnovers, but definitely a young, interesting talent. And PJ Dozier, he was getting playoff minutes against the Lakers, and I don't think any of us anticipated that, but he played solid, and there's some hope for him as well.
Yeah, I think with Bol, it's just kind of like, hey, in the situation in Denver, we're probably not going to have much time to develop you. It was just kind of almost by luck he got minutes this year because of all the injuries and all the COVID stuff they had to deal with in the bubble. In New Orleans, he's actually going to get a chance. And even looking at Gary Harris, like you're losing probably, one of the best guard defenders in the NBA, if not the best. At least you're bringing in an above average defender in Gary Harris too for a guy like Stan Van Gundy who's going to want to play some good defense.
For sure. It makes a lot of sense for all parties, especially where their timelines are, right? Because Jrue Holiday's timeline for now is just too far ahead of the Pelicans, whereas it's pretty much right on par for being the veteran leadership for that Nuggets team, especially if a guy like Paul Millsap doesn't come back.
Yeah, and I also look at it too is like Denver's not going to sign any big free agents 2021. Like they're just not a free agent destination. You already have Drew Holiday in house. Re-signing him is that much easier, and you probably don't care as much about overpaying because like they already overpaid Paul Millsap for like the last 3 years. So I think they'll be fine with that. But moving on to another trade, we got one that is been rumored a little bit. Thunder and Phoenix, Thunder and Suns. We got Ricky Rubio going to the Thunder, Kelly Oubre going to the Thunder, Elie Okobo going to the Thunder, and a 2020 first-round pick, the number 10 pick in the draft from the Suns going to the Thunder, and the Suns are receiving Chris Paul and Dennis Schroeder.
Yeah, so the Dennis Schroeder stuff is the one layer to this trade that hasn't been rumored. But from the Thunder perspective, you're getting Kelly Oubre Jr., you're getting the number 10 overall pick from the Suns. Elie Okobo, I don't even know if I said his name right, but
Elie
another
Okobo,
young
yep.
and then you're getting Ricky Rubio, which is still a decent starting point guard to facilitate. And if you're the Suns, you're getting a 6-man of the year candidate in Dennis Schroeder. You're getting Chris Paul, who is going to help lead the ship alongside Devin Booker. So your upside is significantly higher if you're the Suns and you're playing to win now. Again, whether or not that's the right move for the Suns is a different question. But this would be a move that the Suns take in terms of trying to win now. And the Thunder, again, I just don't know what kind of deal will be in place for Chris Paul. This might be the best kind of deal they can get. A young asset, a decent lottery draft pick, and a veteran back for Chris Paul.
Yeah, I would say this would be if the Thunder got this offer, they would pick it up and they'd accept right away. Even though they don't want to take on multi-years moving forward in terms of Ricky Rubio, getting that number 10 pick would be enough for me to pull the trigger right away. I think if I'm Phoenix, we kind of talked about it on the last show, I don't include number 10 because I just can't do it. I just am. Chris Paul's contract is still $41 million this year and $44 next year. Like we still have to take that in consideration. And then I think if I'm the Suns, I'm not sure if I'm interested in Dennis Schroeder because that's going to eat into my cap space. And being one of the only teams with cap space, I feel like I'd rather maintain the cap space and go after a guy like Jeremy Grant or someone. You know what I mean? Adding one of those wings that's actually available because, Dennis Schroeder could help, but they obviously would have Chris Paul and Devin Booker can kind of lead the show as well. So I feel like I wouldn't be intrigued with the Dennis Schroeder aspect. And if I'm Phoenix, I'm trying to throw in like Frank Kaminsky into the deal because he's a 1-year expiring contract, and that helps me maintain a little bit more cap space instead of having Chris Paul eat into my cap space with the trade. Yeah,
it's a fair point as well.
I'd be interested to see what the Thunder would say if the number 10 pick wasn't included and it was just like a number, a 22 top 10 protected pick. I wonder if they would still accept a deal. It's pretty intriguing what's going to happen. I've heard like a lot of reports saying that like the Thunder aren't getting any good deals and they're just trying to leverage one deal against Phoenix. And they've had success in that in the past. And they talked about how Sam Presti was able to abuse the Clippers with Paul George because there was no other team trying to make the trade, but he was able to get out all those picks. And even, just the moves with Houston. The move with Houston, like nobody was trading for Russell Westbrook, and they were able to get more picks out of that. So that's what I think is interesting. And that's where Phoenix has to be smart. Like you just can't let OKC play you into giving up too much because at the end of the day, as good as Chris Paul is, like the contract is still probably a negative. Like I know that people are trying to say take away the contract from the player, but $40 million is a large chunk of your cap space when you're only getting 109.
I mean, maybe that's something that the Thunder, once we get farther into this free agency period, not free agency, but what I'm saying, this off-season period, in which they say, we have enough draft picks. Maybe draft picks aren't, the end all, and we'll be okay with, a couple of young prospects just to get Chris Paul off the books. I mean, again, it's all about the leverage, and they really don't have much leverage, if any, in this situation with Chris Paul.
If I'm thinking from just the outside perspective, OKC just hired a new head coach. I don't know his name off the top of my head because I know it's a hard pronunciation. He's only 35 years old. Like they're not trying to compete. They're looking to rebuild. They got probably the cheapest head coach they can get. Obviously went through their G League system. They have a couple young guys. Like if I was making a bet or making a guess, I would say Chris Paul will be requesting a trade by the deadline. Like he already wants out, but he just hasn't really been aggressive about it because I think Windhorst reported that Chris Paul has already kind of taken a role in terms of trading himself to Phoenix. Like he's been part of those moves. And that was the same thing that happened when he got traded to Houston. So keep that in mind and what's going to happen. And if you're OKC, you probably want to get him out of here sooner than later.
Yeah, I would agree 100%.
All right, moving on to another trade I got. Pistons and Lakers. This is kind of one that's been rumored, and I think this is one of the moves that'll be available for the Lakers to actually make an upgrade. They're going to be limited due to their cap space. They'll have the mid-level exception, but in terms of making some upgrades, they're picking up Derrick Rose in this trade from the Pistons in exchange for Quinn Cook and Kyle Kuzma.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Kyle Kuzma and Danny Green were both rumored to be in a deal possibly for DeMar DeRozan. DeMar DeRozan does not make any sense for the Los Angeles Lakers in terms of floor spacing, in terms of anything. Whereas this deal, it makes more sense.
Yep.
The Lakers might lose out on Rondo, depending on how much Rondo wants on the open market, which seems to be a lot. And then again, Kyle Kuzma was very streaky. Quinn Cook just isn't a rotational player for the Lakers. You're getting Derrick Rose. The biggest question about Derrick Rose is simply health. If he plays like he did last year with the Pistons, you're getting an offensive point guard who can score in a variety of ways still. He looked really explosive last year for the Pistons, and that kind of pressure that Derrick Rose could put on the defense while being alongside an Anthony Davis, one of the most talented bigs in the league, and then still having LeBron James. The Lakers are going to have floor spacing regardless because that's what suits LeBron James the best. So it's going to help Derrick Rose as well. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Lakers if you're trying to upgrade the point guard position.
And he's not even a guy you have to close with. It's just like he can be your six man. Like he's adapted to that role already. So it's not like you're really concerned about him like coming in. And obviously LeBron's had success working with other players that were quote unquote washed or wouldn't fit in the systems, being Dwight Howard and Rajon Rondo. So like this would be a situation where I think, hey, it makes sense. Kyle Kuzma is not going to get you a ton. His trade value is pretty low at this point. And I think if you're the Pistons, you're just looking at it, hey, this young asset, he's not going to be an all-star. He's not going to be anything crazy, but maybe he can be an above-average starter for me down the line, or just somebody else that can help me kind of sell tickets, because he does have a little bit pop to him. And I want to say Kyle Kuzma is from Detroit.
Okay.
Because I remember him tweeting about like Flint and all the water issues and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I want to say Kyle Kuzma is a hometown guy for Detroit, so that would make a little bit more sense too.
For sure. I mean, again, Kuzma, it could just be role, right? I mean, he's playing with some big superstars. He really, I don't think, found his groove because he's trying to play off of LeBron James and Anthony Davis. It might do him well to have a change of scenery where he's not playing behind, these top alphas in the league.
Yeah, 100%. All right, Kory, you got another crazy trade for us here. We got Pacers, Rockets, Celtics, and Pelicans. So we got the Pacers receiving Russell Westbrook and Gordon Hayward. We have the Rockets receiving Jeremy Lamb, Victor Oladipo, and Doug McDermott. And we have the Celtics receiving Drew Holiday and Miles Turner. And then on the other hand, we have the Pelicans receiving Enes Kanter, Kemba Walker, TJ Leaf, and Poirier, who's a rookie who I definitely didn't pronounce.
Yeah, so this is a crazy trade.
I'm surprised already. I would say before you even get started that you have Westbrook going to the Pacers. I'm already mind blown a little.
Again, this is not a trade that I am condoning, but this is a trade in which the math works.
Yeah.
So, again, today it was rumored too that the Celtics are intrigued by Drew Holiday, and they are up for possibly trading Kemba, if not also Gordon Hayward. And there's also been rumblings and ties to Miles Turner, possibly to the Celtics. So with all of that and the Victor Oladipo nonsense that came out today about Victor Oladipo telling teams, do you have a spot for me? It just feels like this was the ultimate bring all the chaos together type of trade. So the Pacers, they are bringing in Russell Westbrook and Gordon Hayward. Gordon Hayward is from Indiana. You're bringing home the hometown guy. He has a player option. There's also the chance that, Hayward could decline the player option and sign a longer-term deal. Won't be as much money, but it'll be money over a longer period of time. So the Pacers get Gordon Hayward and Russell Westbrook. Westbrook, Malcolm Brogdon. Brogdon goes back into playing the shooting guard role, which I think is actually better for him. Ball handling duties go to Westbrook. Westbrook's reunited with Domantas Sabonis, a guy he's very familiar with. You still have T.J. Warren. You still have the Holiday brothers off the bench. So the Pacers are pretty much adding Westbrook and Hayward while losing Oladipo and freeing up Domantas Sabonis to be the true center, and Goga Badazi will get the backup center role instead of Miles Turner. The Rockets, you're still in kind of a win-now mode. Victor Oladipo is now the new star to place alongside of James Harden. You're getting Jeremy Lamb, who you hope can still be a very good offensive player. Obviously torn ACL, MCL, meniscus, like his knee got all jacked up. I know he's still going through rehab and still getting back into shape. So hopefully he can still be the similar player he was prior to injury, because he was a bucket. Doug McDermott, 3-point marksman, exactly what the Rockets need for how they used to run their offense. I'm assuming it's going to be still very similar. Celtics, Drew Holiday, Miles Turner. You're getting a defensive-minded perimeter guard alongside Marcus Smart. The defense is getting better. One less mouth to feed because Drew Holiday's, I think, more of a low-maintenance guy. He doesn't need to be top 2 in touches like Kemba may need to, or Gordon Hayward. Miles Turner, we know what his role with the Pacers. Play defense, hit threes. Brad seems to utilize him to the best of his ability. The Pelicans, They're doing right by Drew Holiday. They're bringing in a true offensive point guard in Kemba Walker just to get some scoring, and then the rest is pretty much just filler. They're in this trade, more or less, the Pelicans are simply doing right by Drew Holiday and shipping him out, and they're getting Kemba Walker, who can still be a very good offensive player.
Yeah, I think I like this trade for everybody but the Pelicans.
Yeah.
I think I don't think I'd want Kemba Walker because, as you've mentioned in the past, that Kemba Walker contract could be something that is ugly in the future. And like I don't feel like they're getting much for Drew Holiday in terms of like if I was the Pelicans, I'd rather take the Denver deal or some of the Nets deals we've talked about, just because like I don't want Kemba because he doesn't match my timeline. And yeah, he's going to help me win now. But I think one thing that's been very apparent from the Pelicans is like, hey, we're willing to be a little bit more patient because we understand that we have Zion and we have Brandon Ingram. Like there's no real rush for us. And that's why like they were willing to trade Drew Holiday. Because I heard this point brought up on a podcast. It was like the Hawks are trying to trade for Drew Holiday. They're a worse team than the Pelicans, and the Pelicans are trying to trade away Drew Holiday. So like what does that signal to you? You know what I mean?
Right.
One front office is making a lot more sense. And I feel like, to be honest, like the Celtics are getting a steal in this deal. But I guess like Kemba, they're probably viewing a little bit more positively than I am. But again, you're going to have to pay Drew Holiday, so then it's up to you. Do you want to pay him that money? And then Miles Turner, I think, is an ideal fit. You know, I'm a big fan of Turner in terms of his fit across the league. And the Rockets, this is a deal. If I'm the Rockets, I'm like accepting this trade like 10 out of 10 times. Like you're telling me I'm getting rid of Russell Westbrook and bringing in Victor Oladipo, even though we know Oladipo might not ever be the same player he once was. I'd be ecstatic about it just because like of what he can do. And Doug McDermott, like you said, not going to start for them, but he could be a nice 3-point shooter off the bench. Jeremy Lamb, I honestly probably wouldn't expect to see until next season. Like I don't think he'll be ready for 2021, right? Like his knee was pretty bad.
I mean, I know he won't be ready until probably like March or April to begin with. So yeah, and he's basically out the entire year.
Yeah, and I mean for the Pacers, it's if they want to stay competitive and stay good and like still trade away their guys, like this is a way to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're not probably getting the best return for Oladipo and Turner, but if they want like star level players that are going to try to like make the Pacers better than what they were, like you can make an argument the Pacers would be a better team than they were before this trade. But I'm not sure if they're getting the best value in terms of their assets because like you would hope to maybe get something like more future related because Westbrook and Hayward are probably like a little bit past the Pacers timeline if I had to make it.
They're in like almost we're trying to win a title now with the wrong title pieces.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not condoning this trade for the Pacers perspective, but it was just a deal that made sense. And from like the Rockets perspective, you mentioned, also Oladipo expiring. The Rockets then would be free of all that money to then go hard press on a second superstar with, James Harden. Could that be a Giannis Antetokounmpo or somebody else? Maybe, but this would be the best case scenario for them to free up as much cap as possible.
Yeah, because then they could probably trade away that Lamb contract next year. It's like 1 year, $10 million expiring, open up some more cap space. I would just say the Pelicans would be the halt in the trade. Like you'd have to hit the Pelicans with
a draft pick probably.
You know what you could do?
Sell a draft pick.
The Celtics could send them all their draft picks, and that might equal out the trade. They have number 14 and they have number 28, and I think they have number 30 or something along those lines.
Yes.
That would maybe be enough to make it happen. But again, like that Kemba contract, I'm not sure how much.
And just to throw it out, I know like the preliminary deal the Celtics and Pacers have talked about is Gordon Hayward and the 14th pick for Miles Turner. So that 14th pick is obviously on the table, which we already knew. But that's been a deal that the Celtics and Pacers have discussed.
I mean, if the Celtics didn't draft one rookie, I don't think they'd be upset at all. Like they drafted 3 last year or 4 last year. They don't have room on their roster. These guys aren't going to have an opportunity to develop. It really doesn't make sense for them to have those picks.
They're not gonna. I heard Danny Ainge actually had a comment, Nick. I'm not sure if it was today or yesterday, and he said we already drafted 4 rookies last year. He goes, it doesn't make any sense for us to have rookies. That's literally what he said. So to me,
I mean, he's right.
Yeah, those draft picks are being traded within the next couple weeks for sure.
I mean, I know this isn't one of the trades that we have on our lineup, but Miles Turner for Gordon Hayward, like you just said, in the number 14 pick, and I'd be like, send me 28 too. You know what I mean? Send me one of those other picks if you want this deal to happen, because if I'm the Pacers, I don't really have a need to trade for Gordon Hayward. Like, he's not going to push me into title contention, where you make the argument that Miles Turner could push Boston into a higher level of title contention than they already were in, just because of his fit and what he can provide on that roster and more versatility. So I think the Pacers have more leverage in the situation. And there's also way more teams calling for Miles Turner than there are for Gordon Hayward.
At this point, for sure, yeah. Especially because, again, no one really knows if Hayward's going to accept that player option.
Yeah. It's an interesting situation because, like, part of me is like he could decline it. There's been a lot of rumblings about maybe like the Hawks making a move for him and then having him decline the player option, then sign him to like 3 years 60 million or 3 years 75 million, and something within that range.
Yeah.
Where it's like for a team like that honestly kind of makes sense. But let's hit up the next trade. We have Kings and Sixers. Buddy Hield going to Philadelphia, and then the Kings are receiving Al Horford and Zaire Smith and a second round pick. The only thing I'll say about this trade, like obviously Buddy Hield feels a need for the Sixers, gives him that shooting. Contract's not great. King's going to center a veteran presence, kind of teach him how to play basketball the right way. Probably would look a lot better in Sacramento. I still wouldn't be surprised if Sacramento wanted more than a second round pick for taking on Al Horford's contract.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a lot easier for the Sixers to say yes to than the Kings, right? The Sixers obviously need floor spacing. Buddy Hield will provide that floor spacing. And we also know Buddy Hield has already pretty much ruined their relationship in Sacramento. So he's going to be gone.
He's ghosted just like James Harden.
Yeah, and then from the Kings' perspective, they love their bigs, right? So Al Horford's another big to throw in the mix, but he's probably the best veteran guy you could have on this team. He can still bring, a lot of leadership, a lot of basketball IQ to the young squad that they still have in De'Aaron Fox. Bogdanovich is probably going to be back as well. The young guys in Harry Giles, Marvin Bagley, he can help produce, those guys move along in their development. Zaire Smith, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. If it works, great. You're getting a draft
pick. He's a guy that
pick.
had a really weird NBA start. I don't know if you remember. He dealt with injury, and then he had an allergic reaction, in which kept him out the entire season. And he had to his weight went really far down, and then it got back up. I think he saw minutes last year. His rookie season, though, he didn't play at all. So it's essentially like a year was taken off his career. And there was some hype because, if you're not mistaken, this was a pick they traded in the past in the Mikal Bridges trade. Yeah. So this is who they got. So it's like, all right, there has to be some reason that they went out and got him. So there has to be some talent there. It just seems like Philadelphia is a tough situation to develop young players. It's a little easier in Sacramento with less pressure.
For sure. And Doc Rivers now being the head coach in Philly, there's going to be some changes to make in Daryl Morey as well. So I think this just makes sense from both standpoints, or at least most over the Sixers standpoint of trying to flip the culture and trying to flip things, because again, it hasn't worked out. And last year, they went the wrong way in terms of trying to go super big. And Al Horford, I would hate to see him kind of finish his career on the Kings and playing for nothing. But from a veteran leadership standpoint, Horford would be great for the Kings organization, especially if they are trying to turn around their own culture as well.
I think the saving grace for Al Horford would be the last year of his contract's not fully guaranteed. They'd probably cut him, and then you have an opportunity to sign with a better team for that, final year of his deal. But all right, last trade we got, another Russell Westbrook one. In this one, it has him going to the New York Knicks for Taj Gibson, Reggie Bullock, Elfrid Payton, Bobby Portis, Dennis Smith Jr., and the Clippers 2020 first-round pick.
Yeah, so the Knicks are being the New York Knicks. They want to sell seats. They want to bring in a marquee superstar. They're going to pair Russell Westbrook up with R.J. Barrett and Mitchell Robinson.
Worst spacing in the NBA.
I kept Kevin Knox in this deal. I know you were dealing which Kevin Knox was going to the Rockets. For this deal, I wanted the Knicks to keep Kevin Knox just because it gave them the most upside in trying to stay competitive with the young stars. The Rockets are getting Taj Gibson. He can play center for them. Bobby Portis can play power forward center for them. They're getting two possible point guards in Elfrid Payton and Dennis Smith Jr., who I'm not completely out on Dennis Smith Jr. yet. I think there is some hope still. Again, the jump shot isn't great. I know there's not very much substance to put along with that.
You got high tides on your island right now.
Yeah. And then Reggie Bullock, 3-point shooter, can help spread the floor a little bit. So all of these players, I think, can find a good role in Houston alongside James Harden. And then again, the Knicks are just all in on Westbrook, and that's really it. The Knicks are trying to make the playoffs once again with Tom Thibodeau and Russell Westbrook.
I mean, the Knicks are doing this to be relevant. I think that contract is killer though, 41, 44, and 47. I'm just going to keep saying it so people remember how bad the contract is. He'd probably get them in the playoffs this year, or at least in contention. If you're the Rockets, you like this deal from the perspective major cap relief. Every guy we just traded for is on 1-year deal. So they're all expiring, and we just opened up cap. And then not to mention, a guy like Reggie Bullock and Bobby Portis, I could see having an impact on the team. Bullock dealt with injuries last year, was never really healthy. Obviously, players just don't do well with the Knicks sometimes. And your backup point guard, I don't really have much stock left in Dennis Smith Jr. I just think that he doesn't have a good feel for the game. Taj Gibson, probably is a little bit, past playing in the NBA in terms of his age, but he's a good veteran presence to have. Maybe be your backup big, and he'll be happy to collect his $9.4 million. And if you're the Rockets, I think I was talking to Dalton yesterday. They haven't had a first-round pick in like 5 years. You have an opportunity to get somebody in the first round.
Yeah, and that was another thought by adding the Clippers pick is, obviously the Rockets have lost so many draft picks. They get one back here.
I think that would seal the deal for them because not sure if anyone else is going to offer a draft pick for Westbrook. Like if they get the first round pick, now it's like, okay, this is somewhat promising, and all these role players are a lot easier to trade than Russell Westbrook, even though they don't have much value. Like you could find deals where you could make things work, or maybe you add a third team in this deal and you use that first round pick and Bobby Portis's contract, and you get another role player that fits well. I actually don't hate Bobby Portis's fit in Houston either. Maybe it's Elfrid Payton.
Yeah, and not to mention you're freeing up cap space again if you're the Rockets. So you're getting a draft pick, and the only contract that may be on the books would be Bobby Portis if he accepts the player option for next year around $15 million, which again isn't terrible and pretty.
I think it's a team option. So it's
the team option, even better.
Yeah. So then you have the choice on him. So that, like you said, I think the cap relief is huge, and if you can convince the Knicks to give you this deal, you just have to take it, even if you don't like the pieces. You just take the deal for the cap release and the first round pick.
I could definitely see the Knicks saying, or the Rockets saying, no Dennis Smith Jr., give us Kevin Knox instead. And I think
or Frank Ntilikina, to be honest.
Right, or Frank Ntilikina, right.
If I'm Houston, I kind of probably have the most intrigue with Frank, given his defensive standpoint and where he could provide me. Like Dennis Smith, I'm not sure he would ever really pop on them. And Kevin Knox, I don't hate Kevin Knox. I just think he needs to be in a situation where he could develop. Like, I don't think he's washed or a bust quite yet. He's getting close, but he hasn't really had a fair opportunity to develop his skills.
He has everything you want to see from a guy who plays at 3 and 4. Like,
in
terms
I've seen
of wingspan, length. Yeah.
I've seen him live before, and he looks the part. You know what I mean? Like, he looks like an NBA player, and some of the movements look nice. And, like, you can always tell the difference when he's kind of, like, locked in and when he's just kind of out there and kind of confused. So, Kory, though, which star player that we talked about today is most likely to be traded?
Most likely to be traded, I would say Chris Paul, which may sound like maybe it's not a shock, but I think Chris Paul only because of now that we know who the Oklahoma City Thunder head coach is, we know that it's a guy from their own G League development system, a guy that they've been blossoming themselves. It just screams rebuild, and Chris Paul is not going to be there for a rebuild. So Chris Paul makes the most sense as a guy who's going to be on the way out.
Yeah, I think I'd probably lean with Drew Holiday. I think Holiday's a guy that, New Orleans just knows that if they trade him at the deadline, they're not going to get the same value. I think Chris Paul's very likely. I think Westbrook is pretty likely too.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's pretty much 50-50 in terms of Westbrook starting the season on the Houston Rockets.
Yeah, I think Westbrook and Chris Paul would be the two guys highest on my list. Like, they'd be the tier 1 guys I'm really sure are going to get moved. And then the tier 2 guys would be the next 2 guards up. Or maybe tier 2 would be Drew Holiday, and then tier 3 would be Victor Oladipo. So I think after today's news, Victor Oladipo has kind of jumped the ladder a little bit.
Yeah, that was just some weird stuff for Oladipo. And to be honest, it doesn't help him in any way. Like, in terms of getting traded, because it hurts the Pacers' leverage, which makes them less likely to make a deal too. So it's just making things all types of complicated. But anything else, Kory, you want to touch on before we get out here? Obviously, we drop in pods on a regular basis, given the amount of trade rumors that have been dropping every day.
No, again, these are just some trades proposals. There are a lot more players that are going to be rumored. There are probably players being rumored right now that we're missing out on that we're going to see when we get off the pod. But we're going to keep trying to figure out possible scenarios and possible deals and work through this craziness that is the NBA offseason.
100%. And head to OTGbasketball.com or follow us on Twitter at OTGbasketball. We'll be trying to keep up with the rumors as best as we can. And as always, you can find the outlet on all streaming platforms.
Peace out, Knuckleheads.